You know, today's still the Lord's Day. We call it Mother's Day, and that's a good thing. Sunday is the Lord's Day. This is the day which Jesus Christ raised from the dead. This is a day which we have in our faith to recognize, to give us assurance that no matter what happens in this life, even the ultimate cost, that of death, that we have victory laid up in Jesus. But this is a day that as nations we have set aside to recognize a very important figure in our lives, a very important position in the family structure, that of mothers. And it is certainly scriptural to do so. For Ephesians, the 6th chapter and verse 1 says, children, I heard some adults, children, that's right, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, for this is the first commandment with promise. Now, we won't talk about specific promise, but just children understand that it's promise that we won't bonk you on top of the head if you obey us. That's my promise to you. But we are to honor our fathers and our mothers, and today's a day we've set aside to honor our mothers. You may recall, and quite possibly not, that I spoke last year for 2 weeks on the topic of the power of motherhood. I did so because I think in our society, in our culture, and throughout time that we have greatly misrepresented the role of mothers, the role of women in our lives. And it is easy to do so. For in our public ministry, in our worship, we are giving roles as men and as women. We see that those roles as men are, if we come back to Ephesians, the 5th chapter, that we are to be heads of the house, and that the wife is to be submissive to the husband. We see in the public worship that when we all come together to worship together, that the women are to remain silent, not to usurp authority over a man, but that we as men are given that task of public exhortation. But gentlemen, I believe that it is through laziness, through unintentional self-servingness, we have greatly misrepresented what those verses mean. For go back, we don't have time this morning to do it, but I encourage you to read Ephesians, the 5th chapter, where it talks about the husbands being the head of the wives, and the wives to be submissive to her husband, and read, husbands, what we are obligated to do, and you tell me who the master is. You see, I'm to serve my wife to the point of giving my life for her. You see, being the head of the household doesn't mean that I can sit in my lazy boy, bark out orders as a king, and that all things done serves good old Mike. When we look at godly leadership, we understand that the exact opposite is meant. Furthermore, that while we understand that there are restrictions in the public format, I believe in part because, gentlemen, from the very beginning, we look back at Adam, we look at our society today, we have done an awful job of doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so man needs prodding. Right, ladies? Don't you continually do that? Why do you do that? And gentlemen, we have these words for that. What do we call it? Nag. Ladies are giving all the answers, Fred. We call that nagging. Ladies, you don't have to nag. I think it's important for you to understand that if you tell a man to do something, he's going to do it. He doesn't need reminded once every other month. Once a year. He'll get to it. No, I say that jokingly to say that we all too often have shirked our responsibilities, have not taken the true form of leadership that we are to do, the form of leadership that's servitude. And there's great consequences that come with that. Fred read for us from 2 Timothy. I tried to get him read from 1 Timothy, but he had me check from 2 Timothy, the first chapter, 3 through 7, where Paul is thankful for Timothy. And he notes some of the success of Timothy comes from his grandmother, Lois, and his grandmother, Eunice, who, it says, verse 5, I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Louise and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. Mothers have a unique opportunity, a unique obligation and influence on the life of those around us. If we turn over just a couple of pages to the book of Titus, we see there in Titus, the 2nd chapter, that verse 1 talks about the older men teaching the younger. Verse 1, but as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in the faith, in love, and steadfastness. Now verse 3. Older women. Now I'm preaching to the air. We don't have any of those with us. Well, we aren't saying old women here, because I know we don't have any old women with us. Older women, as in older than some. That would be everyone. Who's our youngest lady? Kendi? Right? Does that be right? Everyone other than Kennedy. All the ladies other than Kendi. Older women. We are talking about women here, not children. Older women, verse 3, likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderous or slaves to much wine. What are you talking about, Mike? Why are you putting obligations on them? They are to teach what is good and so train the young women to love their husbands and their children. You see, I believe that in our society we've got so caught up in proving, in showing, in demonstrating that a woman can do everything a man can, that we forgot that their intent, their purpose, their design was to do everything a man cannot do. Ladies, you have a unique role. You have an important task that I encourage you, do not forsake. Do not neglect. If you would, turn your Bibles to Proverbs, the 31st chapter, and we're going to spend the remainder of our study here today. In verses 10 and following, where your scriptures you will read are talking about a virtuous what? Woman. But the title this morning is Virtuous Mother. And we'll talk about this virtuous mother. I said they have an important role. They have an important task. Mothers should be appreciated. They should be honored. Make sure, express your appreciation this day for the mother roles in your life. They should be appreciated and honored because not all mothers are honorable. Now, I say that because every mother should be honored. Christian was born over 14 years ago. And gentlemen, those of you that are over the age of 55, if you're over 55 and you were present when your children were born, gentlemen, I know you ladies were, raise your hand. You're over 55 and we're present. Okay, fair. More than I would have thought. More than I would have thought. Because traditionally that wasn't always the case, right? What did us bums, guys do? we sat out in the waiting room. And as the day anxiously came about, Becca, as I know you're getting there, you're anxious, I was pleading, can't I just wait in the waiting room, Matt? Let me know when it's done. I can't really do anything, right? I don't need to be there to witness it. I am grateful that I was there for each of our children. And young men, I encourage you to think about that, because there are things that I would have missed that I, to this day, could not have fathomed and understood. I was grateful to be there for that miracle. But one of the things that I started to realize at that moment, you see, we can have a lot of criticisms of our parents because they're not all perfect. Plugging your ears down here. They've got some mistakes to them. And it's easy as we grow up to think about some of those mistakes. Especially because you haven't been a parent yet, or I haven't been a parent yet at this stage. And Emily, I was going to do it so much better. I never understood until Christian was born how much, ladies, you give up for your children. I mean that in so many ways. Your mothers have made sacrifices for you that you can never fathom until you've had your own children. And I believe that's why we go through periods of our life where we respect our parents a lot less than we should, but we come back around. You know, people say, oh, my teenagers know everything, but by the time they're 26 or 27, they're starting to come back around. To me, it wasn't about age. It was about understanding what parenting took. Mothers make sacrifices. But not all mothers are what they should be. Some are further than others. I want you to consider for a moment the giraffe. You know what the first thing experiences that was born? Christian? Say that a little louder. A 6-foot plummet to the ground. Now, mothers, parents, those babies, they're slippery, aren't they? Especially in the bathtub. Right? They're like little greased piglets. Hard to keep a hold of them. They don't operate. They don't help. You know, they don't clutch to you. They're slippery. And our children were dropped. Amanda didn't like me saying that. But they were. I promise you. Right? That giraffe doesn't bother laying down, Emily. Stands right there with those tall stilts of a leg. Lets that baby drop 6 feet. How about that? What about the cockatoo? Or the cockadoo, I'm trying to say. The cockadoo bird. You know what she does with her eggs when it's getting time to lay her eggs? She picks out another nest and she watches that mother bird. And when it leaves the nest, she flies over there. I don't know how she lays her eggs, but lays her eggs in a strange bird's nest. Why? So she can go off and live life like a single mother. You all laugh because you just saw the wisdom in that. Right? You're a little bit jealous. Oh yeah, because we understand the obligation, right? It gets worse because you say, man, that cockadoo is not a very good mother, right? But what about the mother of the bird who lives in that nest, who doesn't notice that cockadoo egg hatches first, and that cockadoo bird is a little bigger than her little chicks, and that cockadoo chick eats a little bit more than her chicks until it's strong enough to shove the birds that belong there out of their nest. They call it a parasite brood. What about those black bears? We know in these parts that oftentimes black bears have 2 to 3 cubs. Been seen with even up to 4. But did you know that oftentimes if a black bear has only 1 cub, she will consider it not worth her time to nurture only 1 cub, and she will abandon it to die. Ohenia, this isn't intended for you, but Mac's sitting there looking at me. Young men, Mac, be mindful of the mothers you are picking. Christian, Gabe, Caden, Tanner, Tyler, Tucker. Parents, if I've missed one, point them out, please. Young men. Debbie's pointing at her dad. Dave! Jimmy! Be mindful of the mothers you're picking. You see, there's a lot wrong with our dating process in this world, isn't there? You see, we pick our spouses based on a good time. We pick our spouses based on attraction. We pick our spouses, as we'll see in just a few minutes, based on charm. You know what charm means? This goes for you ladies, Emma. Charm is what takes place when you're dating. Charm is me putting my best foot forward for Amanda so I could trick her into marrying me. I put my very best foot forward. That's what the dating process is about. The trick the other one into liking you. There's a flawed process there, isn't there? You're picking a mother, ladies, a father for your children, and don't forget it. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Christian is a good boy. I mean that sincerely. I am proud of him. But the conversations he and I've had, they weren't conversations where he was fearful of his father, were because of irrelevant behaviors towards his mother. In our household, we don't mess around with that, do we, Christian? It's very serious. No exceptions, no negotiations, no talking. I picked her for you. She's a good mother. Right, girls? Yeah. I picked her for a purpose. Something we talked about. Those of you that aren't married, talk to those whom you're interested in spending your life with. Talk about children. Talk about careers. Talk about money. Otherwise, it's entrapment. And we have too much of that in our society. Don't forget that you are picking someone to mother, to father your children. And thanks be to God that we have such virtuous mothers in our lives. If you would, read with me this morning. Was that a thump I heard after talking about children falling? Thank you for the illustration. Such a cooperative group you are. I appreciate you so much. We're going to read through this, and then we're going to point out a few points about virtuous mothers. And by the way, mothers, you're about to, I know you mothers. Emily all week told me, Emily did so much, I'm singling her out, but there's so many more of you that did so much. But I'm going to single Emily out because she told me, if she told me once, she told me 5 times this week she felt so guilty about not doing more. I know you mothers. I know your hearts. You are going to feel guilty when we read these verses. That's not what this is about. This is acknowledging what you have done, what you are doing, and setting a goal that, quite frankly, is beyond reach for the perfect mother, the perfect woman. Be inspired. Don't feel inadequate. I said that I picked Amanda to be these children's mother. Before we start reading this, let me be more clear. God created her for that purpose. God, ladies, created you for that purpose. You are not inadequate. You are perfectly equipped for the job. Verse 10, an excellent wife, who can find her? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant, and she brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it with the fruit of her hands and plants a vineyard. Verse 17. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. 25. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She holds well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her work praise, and her works praise her in the gates. The virtuous mother. Consider first her character. Her character is defined by her industry, by her prudence, and by her piety. Look, if you would, at the idea of her industry. And how many mothers have you known like this? In verse 15, we see that she rises early. She rises while it is yet night. Verse 18 says that her lamp never goes out, implying, ladies, what you said so many times, she's not only up early, she's up late. In other words, a mother's work is never done. She encourages her dependents. Verse 15, she rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portion for her maidens. She gets up not to just go about meaningless tasks, but she gets up for a purpose, to help those who are around us. Brethren, we are so concerned in this world today. We are so concerned in this greedy, selfish American culture with my needs and my wants. I talked earlier, frankly, to you husbands and you men about the call to duty, about the need to serve those around us, to not to flop down and not to demand it everyone around us, but rather, as we see the example set by our mothers and by our wives, to be concerned with the welfare of others. You see, ladies, I alluded to the idea earlier that we've got so tied up with proving that you can do everything a man can do that we've forgotten that you were meant to do what the man cannot do. Not to imply that we cannot cook. Mike, you've proven that. But to imply that you have a purpose. It hurts my ears. It saddens my heart to hear mothers defensive. I'm only a mother. We've struggled with this in our household. I believe in part because society says that if women aren't producing financially, it implies they are not capable. Amanda is tackling the most important, the most difficult task that we have in our household. She does that because she's better at it than I am. Isn't it crazy today that we are arguing there's no difference between men and women? I'm not being crude when I say this. I'm just stating obvious. Look in the mirror. We couldn't be, in some ways, any more different. We each have a purpose. And you see, husbands, our purpose is the head of the household is not to get what we want. It's a selfish king. It's to provide leadership. It's to provide leadership in service. It's to serve those around us. And we see that example through her industry that the mother sets. The example is once again brought up in verse 19. She puts her hand to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. The distaff and the spindle are two. The distaff was what all the wool was on. You know what she's doing here? This woman is making profit at every turn, and yet she's making thread to make clothes. Why? Because it's important to her family. And if it's important to her family, she's going to take it into her own hands, and she's going to make it the very best. I'm not implying that it is wrong for women to have jobs outside the home. In fact, how many verses in this very passage do we read that the woman is doing precisely that? But we say over and over again today that it is impossible to live in one income. And if both of you work outside your house, I am not criticizing you for that. But here's where I will criticize. Here is what happened in my life, because we even set up in advance the children so that we could have a job where Amanda could be home with the children and still work, because we were foolish enough to think that she needed something to do while she raised children, Sally. True foolishness in our thought process. Here's what I'm getting at. We say, and I gave my phone to Lee. We say it takes two families, two incomes to support a livelihood, while we carry around these things in our pockets that cost thousands of dollars. You say, oh, mine's included. No, my phone was free. Listen, folks, they don't give you anything free. You're paying for it. They gave me this free phone. I paid the company, I know this isn't the case with you, Fred, I pay the company $250 a month just for the service. They gave me the phone free. Do the math, you're paying. And then we have two vehicles, oftentimes which cost $20,000, $30,000 a piece. We have insurance on these vehicles. We have big screen TVs. We have cable in our house. We have air conditioning. We have heating. We have all the best furniture in our house. And our children go neglected. If we must work, and we must, one way or another, let's make sure that it's to the purpose of building our families up. Not to the neglect of our children. Not to the neglect of our godly purpose within our house. I say these things so strongly because I, like so many of you, have fallen in to the trap at points in my life of more. We need to speak to our young ones. Because once Adam and Eve had eaten that fruit, they couldn't spit it back out. You young folks that are courting or that are setting the course of your future life, be mindful of debt. Be mindful of the obligations you set upon yourself going forward. I would share with you young ones the advice that I'm grateful Larry Krause shared with me. He said, Mike, when you get married, have 2 incomes, but live on one. The wisdom in his advice was in setting habits, in setting a course that left all the options open in the world. She sets an example. She does so, gentlemen, verse 13, willingly. I once saw a financial layout of if we paid our wives or our mothers for everything they did, what they would earn in the marketplace. I don't remember the number now because it quite frankly is irrelevant, but it was in the 6 figures. If we paid them market value for what they do. And that is excluding the evaluation of all the intangibles that are so important. She does this not only willingly, verse 27, regularly, continually. She does it without regard, verse 17, to fatigue. Her prudence. She sells her produce, verse 24, of her labor. Verse 16, she uses her grains for permanent benefit. I try and keep this in mind, something Amanda and I talk about. When we spend money, what are we spending it on? This lady, in verse 16, takes the fruit and plants a vineyard. She does something with the produce of her labor that will benefit them tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, the year after, and the year after that. She sets a beautiful example with her prudence. She provides for her family, verse 15, food, verse 21. She's not fearful of the cold because she's prepared. She conducts herself, verse 26, with love and kindness. And then her piety. In verse 30, we see that she performs not only before man, but before God. Charm is deceitful. That's the tricks we play on each other. Right, Emma? That's what he does to tell you, you should like me. Right? Charm is deceitful. Beauty is vain. Gentlemen, marry the right wife, and she will grow more beautiful by the day. Age will not steal that from her. She benefits, verse 20, the poor. Everything about this woman is giving. Don't you know women like that? Mothers, wives like that. Let me conclude with her worth. What would you give for your mother? What would you give for your wife? Gentlemen, when I ask this question, truly consider it. What would you exchange for your wife? Too often, we've done precisely that. We've exchanged our own pleasure. We've exchanged for wealth. We've exchanged for careers. We've exchanged for our hobbies. We've exchanged for our own toys. Our wives. An excellent wife, verse 10, who can find her? She is far more precious than jewels. There's no more important decision that you will ever make in your life than the spouse you will marry. You say, well, what about following the Lord? What about my decision to give my life to Him? It's the greatest decision you will make that will affect your walk in the Lord. Her value is beyond worth. Verse 30, her qualities make her all the more lovely. Her children call her blessed. Her husband is praising her. Verse 29, she excels beyond all. Boys, you can say this about your moms. I've heard you say it so many times. There's good women out there, 29 says, but Mom, you're the best. Say it and mean it. She's rarely found. She's rarely found. I had a gentleman come to me one time and said, Mike, and he was standing next to me. Mike, you have a wonderful wife. Amen. Really got me amen. Oh, she's so helpful in everything you do. Amen. She's not just helpful, she's the best behind it. And then he says, but he was sincere. But don't worry, I know they don't come that way. You have to train them. We can be arrogant, can't we, Johnny? We guys, we have a special knack for it. She's trained me in so many ways. Make sure you share that with your spouse, with your mother. She's a blessing to her family. She causes her husband, verse 23, to praise her children, praise her, and honor God. Verse 28, her husband delights in her. And gentlemen, are you ready for this? Boast to others of her. Verse 31, she's a comfort to all around them. I think of mentors in my life, on different aspects of my life. But ladies, I'm blessed to be here in this congregation where I'm speaking specifically to so many of you. I gave roses. We gave roses to each of you here this morning. Be mindful of the fact that your motherly, virtuous impact goes beyond your immediate household. You're having an impact on lives. And I thank you personally for what you're doing, for what you've done. And I pray that you would continue, that you would ever strive to be faithful to our Lord and Savior. Aren't we blessed to serve a God who provided for absolutely everything we needed? Not only physically, but even more importantly, as difficult as that is for us to get our minds wrapped around it, more importantly, spiritually. He's provided for you this day so that each of your spiritual needs can be met. If you've never made the decision to dedicate your life to Jesus Christ, if you are not receiving the spiritual blessings that come through only Christ, then as we stand and sing, why don't you come forward, make that need known, whether it's prayers, whether it's taking the next step in your salvation, or whether it's encouragement from one another. If you have a spiritual need, please come forward as together we stand and